The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor. Silence filled the ballroom as 200 of the city's elite turned to stare. In that moment, Margaret Thompson, a woman who had scrubbed their toilets for 30 years, stood tall in a designer gown that cost more than most people's cars. "You invited me as a joke," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned quiet. "But the joke, Mr. Whitmore, is on you. What happened next would shake the foundations of high society forever. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began." Chicago, 1994. The Gold Coast district gleamed with wealth while the South Side struggled in shadows. Margaret Thompson walked through those shadows every morning at 4 a.m. Her worn shoes clicked against wet pavement as she made her way to the bus stop, cleaning supplies weighing down her tired shoulders. At 52, Margaret had been cleaning houses for the wealthy for 3 decades. She knew their secrets. She'd seen their true faces when the cameras weren't rolling and the public wasn't watching. But Margaret carried secrets of her own. Secrets that would soon turn their world upside down. The Whitmore estate sat like a fortress on Lakeshore Drive. 40 rooms of marble, crystal, and contempt. Richard Whitmore III inherited it all. The house, the business empire, and the belief that some people were born to serve while others were born to rule. Every Tuesday and Friday, Margaret cleaned that mansion. Every Tuesday and Friday, she endured Richard's casual cruelty. "Don't touch the good china with those hands," he'd sneer. "And make sure you use the servant's entrance." Margaret would nod silently, swallow her pride, and do her job. She had 2 children to feed and dreams that refused to die. But Richard Whitmore had no idea who he was really dealing with. The year 1994 was when everything started to crack. Margaret's daughter, Jasmine, had just been accepted to Northwestern University, full scholarship. Her son, Marcus, showed promise as an artist. After decades of sacrifice, Margaret finally saw light at the end of the tunnel. Then came the diagnosis. "Breast cancer," the doctor said, his voice gentle but direct. "Stage 2. We need to act fast." Margaret sat in that sterile room, hearing the words but feeling numb. Treatment meant time off work. Time off work meant no money. No money meant her children's dreams would die with her. She thought about telling the Whitmores, asking for time off with pay. Just this once. After 30 years of perfect service. The next Friday, she gathered her courage. "Mrs. Whitmore," she began, approaching Richard's wife in the sitting room. "I need to speak with you about—" "Not now, Margaret." Patricia Whitmore waved her off without looking up from her magazine. "The ladies from the club are coming for tea. Make sure you polish the silver properly this time." Margaret tried again the following week with Richard himself. "Sir, I've been meaning to discuss." "What is it?" Richard barely glanced up from his newspaper. "And make it quick. I have important calls to make. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I need some time to—" Richard's laugh cut her off. Cold and dismissive. "Cancer? Well, that's unfortunate. But I can't run a charity, Margaret. If you can't do the job, I'll find someone who can." The words hit Margaret like physical blows. 30 years of loyalty. 30 years of keeping their secrets. And this was their response. But Margaret Thompson was made of sterner stuff than Richard Whitmore could ever imagine. That night, she made a decision that would change everything. If stories like this move you the way they move me, then don't just watch, subscribe to Black Nation. Because we've got more untold stories waiting for you. What Richard Whitmore didn't know was that Margaret Thompson had been planning for this moment her entire life. Every morning before work, while her children slept, Margaret studied. Correspondence courses in business administration, real estate licensing, investment strategies. For 20 years, she had been educating herself in the language of wealth and power. And every month, without fail, Margaret invested $50, sometimes $100 when she could spare it, in carefully chosen stocks. "Mama, why do you read all those business magazines?" Jasmine had asked when she was younger. "Knowledge is power, baby," Margaret had replied. And one day, Mama's gonna need all the power she can get. By 1994, Margaret's investments had grown to something substantial. Not millionaire money, but enough. Enough for her treatment. Enough for her children's education. Enough for what came next. The morning after Richard's cruel dismissal, Margaret walked into his office with an envelope. "What's this?" Richard asked, annoyed. "My resignation," Margaret said calmly. "Effective immediately." Richard smirked. "Good luck finding another job. I'll make sure to give you the reference you deserve." Margaret smiled. The first genuine smile she'd ever shown in that house. "Oh, Mr. Whitmore. I won't be needing another job. You see, I've been watching, learning, waiting. And now, she paused, savoring the moment. Now I'm going to be your competitor. What happened next will leave you stunned. But before we get there, make sure you subscribe to Black Nation so you never miss stories that shake the soul. Margaret used her savings to purchase a small commercial cleaning company that was struggling to stay afloat. Within 6 months, she had turned it around. Within a year, she was bidding on contracts that the Whitmore Corporation had held for decades. And she was winning. Thompson Professional Services didn't just clean buildings, they transformed them. Margaret hired the best workers, paid them well, and treated them with respect. Word spread quickly through Chicago's business community. Meanwhile, Margaret was getting her treatments. Chemotherapy sessions scheduled between client meetings. Radiation appointments squeezed in before site inspections. "Why don't you slow down, Mama?" Marcus asked during one of her hospital visits. "Because, baby," Margaret said, adjusting her headscarf with dignity. "Success is the best revenge. And I'm not done succeeding yet." 2 years later, Margaret Thompson had become a force in Chicago business. Her company employed over 300 people. She owned property in 3 states. Her children were thriving in college, fully funded by their mother's incredible transformation. But Margaret wasn't satisfied yet. She had bigger plans. The Whitmore Corporation was struggling. Bad investments, worse management, and a reputation for treating employees poorly had begun to catch up with them. Contracts were being lost to companies like Thompson Professional Services at an alarming rate. That's when Richard Whitmore made his biggest mistake yet. The Chicago Business Association's annual charity gala was the social event of the year. $500 a plate. A who's who of the city's elite. The kind of event where deals were made and reputations were built or destroyed. Richard was on the planning committee, naturally. As the evening approached, he noticed a name on the guest list that made him do a double take. Margaret Thompson, Thompson Professional Services. He called his assistant immediately. "Did someone really approve this cleaning lady for the gala?" "Sir, Thompson Professional Services is a major sponsor this year. They donated $50,000. Richard's mind raced. An idea formed, cruel, humiliating, and perfect for putting this upstart back in her place. He picked up his phone and dialed. "Margaret, this is Richard Whitmore. I see you're planning to attend our little charity function next week." Margaret's voice was steady. "That's correct. Well, I just wanted to call personally and encourage you to come. In fact, I insist on it. We'd love to see how the help cleans up for a real society event." The line was quiet for a moment. "I'll be there, Richard," Margaret said finally. "You can count on it. This was only the beginning. And trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. Hit that subscribe button to stay with us till the end." Richard hung up, laughing to himself. He immediately began making calls to his friends. "You have to come Saturday night," he told them. "I've invited that cleaning woman. You know, the one who thinks she's some big businesswoman now. This should be entertaining." The joke spread through their social circle like wildfire. Everyone wanted to see Margaret Thompson try to fit in where she didn't belong. They had no idea what Margaret had planned. Saturday night arrived like destiny itself. The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel sparkled with crystal and gold. Chicago's elite mingled in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, champagne flutes catching the light from massive chandeliers. Richard Whitmore stood near the entrance with his wife and friends, waiting to see Margaret Thompson stumble into their world so they could tear her down. "She probably rented something from a discount store," Patricia whispered to her friends, who giggled behind their hands. "Or maybe she'll show up in her cleaning uniform," added another. The group erupted in quiet laughter. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the ballroom doors opened. Margaret Thompson entered like royalty. The room didn't just quiet, it stopped. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Champagne glasses paused halfway to lips. Even the orchestra seemed to skip a beat. Margaret wore a custom Valentino gown in deep emerald green that perfectly complemented her rich brown skin. Diamonds, real diamonds, sparkled at her throat and ears. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that framed her face like a crown. But it wasn't just what she wore. It was how she wore it. Margaret Thompson walked into that ballroom like she owned it. Her head held high, her shoulders back, her smile radiating confidence and grace. Every step was measured, powerful, purposeful. Behind her walked 2 companions that made several people gasp out loud. Dr. James Patterson, the renowned surgeon and Margaret's oncologist, offered his arm. Margaret had beaten her cancer and asked him to escort her tonight. The second was her daughter, Jasmine, now Dr. Jasmine Thompson, having just completed her medical degree. Young, brilliant, and beautiful in her own designer gown. Richard Whitmore's face went white, then red, then white again. "Is that?" Patricia stammered. "The cleaning lady," Richard finished, his voice barely a whisper. Margaret walked directly to their group. The crowd parted before her like the Red Sea. "Good evening, Richard," she said, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent space. "Thank you for the personal invitation." Richard's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. This is unexpected." Margaret smiled, and it was dazzling. "Oh, but you specifically encouraged me to come. You said you wanted to see how the help would clean up for a real society event." The blood drained from Richard's face. He looked around desperately, realizing that dozens of people were listening to every word. I never. Actually, you did." Margaret's voice remained perfectly calm, perfectly controlled. "But let me save you the embarrassment of lying in front of all these lovely people." She turned to address the crowd that had gathered around them. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce myself properly. My name is Margaret Thompson, CEO of Thompson Professional Services. Mr. Whitmore here used to be my employer. I cleaned his toilets for 30 years. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. This was not how society events typically unfolded. "When I was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago," Margaret continued, her voice growing stronger, "I asked this man I had served faithfully for 3 decades, for help. Not money, not charity, just understanding. Time to heal." The ballroom was dead silent now. He laughed at me. He told me that if I couldn't do the job, he'd find someone who could. Richard tried to speak, but Margaret raised her hand. "So I left, and I built something of my own. Something better. Something that treats people like human beings instead of property." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Tonight, Mr. Whitmore invited me here as a joke. He wanted to watch me embarrass myself, to put me back in what he considers my place." Margaret stepped closer to Richard, her eyes locked on his. "But the joke, Mr. Whitmore, is on you. Because while you've been playing your little games, I've been playing a bigger one." Margaret reached into her evening purse and pulled out a single sheet of paper. "This," she announced to the crowd, "is a purchase agreement. As of this afternoon, I am the majority shareholder of Whitmore Corporation." The ballroom erupted. Gasps, exclamations, and the sound of someone dropping their champagne glass created a symphony of shock. Richard's face went through every color in the spectrum. "That's impossible," he whispered. "Your father's company went public in 1987, Margaret said calmly. "Shares have been trading freely ever since. While you were busy believing you were untouchable, I was busy buying every share I could get my hands on. Slowly, quietly, patiently." She smiled at his stricken expression. "Turns out 30 years of watching and learning pays off. I know how your business works better than you do. I know your contracts, your weaknesses, your mistakes. And I use that knowledge to build something stronger." Margaret turned back to the crowd. "As majority shareholder, I'll be making some changes to Whitmore Corporation, starting with employee benefits, healthcare, and treating every worker with the dignity they deserve." The crowd began to murmur with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. Richard finally found his voice. "You can't do this. You're just. What?" Margaret's voice was soft but deadly. "A cleaning lady? A servant? Someone beneath you?" She stepped closer to him one final time. "Richard Whitmore, I am exactly who I've always been. The difference is, now you know it too." With that, Margaret Thompson turned and walked away, her head held high, her daughter's arm linked through hers. The crowd parted once again, but this time it wasn't out of shock, it was out of respect. As Margaret reached the exit, spontaneous applause began to ripple through the ballroom. First one person, then 10, then 50. By the time she reached the doors, the entire room was on its feet, clapping for the woman who had just rewritten the rules of their world. Richard Whitmore stood alone in the center of the ballroom, his empire crumbling around him, his pride shattered like glass on marble floor. Outside the hotel, Margaret paused and looked up at the Chicago skyline, a skyline where she now owned a significant piece. "How do you feel, Mama?" Jasmine asked. Margaret considered the question seriously. "Proud," she said finally. "Not because I destroyed him, but because I built something better. Something worthy of the woman I always knew I could be." In the months that followed, Margaret's takeover of Whitmore Corporation became a business school case study in strategic patience and social justice. She kept her promise. Employee wages increased by 40%. Healthcare benefits were expanded to cover families. The company culture transformed from one of fear to one of respect and excellence. Richard Whitmore, stripped of his majority control and his reputation, eventually sold his remaining shares and left Chicago entirely. Some say he moved to Florida, where no one knew his story. Others say he never recovered from the humiliation of that night. Patricia Whitmore filed for divorce 6 months later, citing irreconcilable differences. Though those close to the situation knew the real reason was her husband's spectacular fall from grace. Thompson Professional Services continued to grow, eventually expanding nationwide. Margaret became one of the most respected business leaders in the Midwest, known not just for her success, but for her commitment to lifting others as she climbed. Dr. Jasmine Thompson established a free clinic on Chicago's South Side, specializing in cancer treatment for underserved communities. She often credited her mother's journey for inspiring her dedication to healing. Marcus Thompson's art career flourished, his work now displayed in galleries across the country. His most famous piece, a portrait of his mother in her emerald gown, hangs in the lobby of Thompson Professional Services headquarters. Legacies like this deserve to be remembered. Subscribe to Black Nation, and let's keep these stories alive together. Today, Margaret Thompson's story is whispered in corporate boardrooms and shared in business schools across the nation. It's a story about more than revenge or business success. It's about the power of patience, the strength found in education, and the dignity that can never be taken away, only temporarily hidden. Margaret often speaks to young entrepreneurs, and her message is always the same. They see what they want to see. They believe what makes them comfortable. Use that blindness to your advantage. Learn what they refuse to teach. Build what they claim you cannot build. And when the time comes, show them exactly who you've always been. The cleaning lady who became a CEO. The servant who became the boss. The joke that became the punchline. Margaret Thompson proved that sometimes the most powerful move is the one nobody sees coming. So the next time someone tries to put you in a box, remember Margaret's story. Remember that dignity cannot be stolen, dreams cannot be destroyed, and patience, true patience, is the most powerful weapon of all. The ballroom may have been silent that night in 1996, but Margaret Thompson's legacy echoes still. We tell our stories for us by us. Subscribe to Black Nation, join the community, and let's make sure these voices are never silenced. Because every cleaning lady deserves her crown, and every crown deserves to be worn with pride.